But generally speaking, burnout happens not always because you work long hours, but because you're doing things that don't bring you enjoyment or that you feel good at. So my theory is allow people to do what they naturally do well. Let them tackle it. And I think we'll all benefit from
it. What happens when a military veteran with nearly 3 decades of experience steps out of the Pentagon and into the future of space strategy? Well, in this episode, I sit down with Dave Brewer, a retired Air Force officer, and we unpack his vantage view on defense innovation, space as the next strategic frontier, and how blockchain, AI, and quantum, I know it's a lot of buzzwords, have the potential to redefine geopolitics. So let's go. Brew, tell me, what is keeping you up at night?
Thanks for the question, Chris. Simply said, global security is fragile right now. I say in a lot of meetings, we're all one strongly worded email away from World War III, right? And that's to really minimize the chaos that's going on. But in actuality, I think the stage is set so that there's divisions amongst Axis and allies. There's a number of integrations of technology within governmental systems that creates an ambiguity or some distrust amongst societies and how that can impact us. In fact, I think that we're just coming into the art of the possible for both opportunities and for threats, both with governmental organizations as well as non-governmental organizations. So, I think it's a scary time right now if technology is taken in a path that is that's weaponized, quite frankly. Yeah, that's what keeps me up at night, sir.
Yeah, and I think thank you for the answer, because there is a lot of untapped, areas we're now moving into, right? We'll talk about technology convergence to some extent, later during this podcast. But let's start with the human side of a career that most of us probably will never experience, because you've spent nearly 3 decades in military intelligence. So what is one project, one mission, one moment, and of course, no names, no places, no confidential information, but what is one that really changed you on a personal level?
Sure. And actually the entirety of the journey, I think it's a formative one. I believe it's interesting, and hopefully the listeners will as well. But I began my career as an enlisted aircraft maintainer. I was always interested in becoming a fighter pilot since I was a young kid, right? And so when I signed up for the U.S. Air Force, I said, just get me as close to the jet as possible. And really not even knowing what the title of my job was. I was a crew chief, right, on F-16 fighters. And so as I spent the first 8 years in an enlisted role, I learned from great leaders and from some that were struggling. But that being said, that was a very formative time for me professionally and personally as I moved up through my 20s. I was then a fighter pilot for the U.S. Air Force for about 4 to 5 years, injured on a training mission, much better story over a drink. But that being said, that's how I converted from being a fighter pilot into an intelligence officer, which has spanned nearly 20 years of my career. So that being said, one specific event that kind of anchors me, that was a pivot point in my career, was actually one of my deployments to Iraq. So I was at an airbase called Balad. I controlled the airspace north of Baghdad, and I was one of the last U.S. Air Force members to come out of Iraq. And if I can just reference for storytelling purposes, we just saw the debacle of how the U.S. pulled out of Afghanistan. Mm-hmm. People jumping on aircraft, rolling down the runway. It just was, they were actually soldiers that lost their lives, unfortunately, and prayers for their families. But we were trying to avoid that back in 2011. So as I was deployed, it all started actually with some family struggles. My wife was pregnant with our third child. She was having medical complications with the pregnancy. So that was a tough time to get on an airplane, leave my two daughters and a pregnant wife to go into combat operations. It was about a 7-month deployment in that case. So as I came into country with my heart a little bit heavy and empathetic with my wife, the rules of engagement I found very challenging, but they were formative as well. And what I mean by that was within Iraq in 2011, the rules of engagement were more or less you cannot shoot or fire unless you can prove you were fired upon. Think about the complexities of that. So at the time, I was a captain or an O3 in the Air Force as an officer. So I was challenged to shape the battle space. And really what my colonel was telling me was, I need you to help some of the bad guys go away, but we can't use weapons to do it. So good luck. Not to mention, these nefarious actors in the area have survived over 10 years of global war on terrorism, where both the United States and our NATO partners have been fighting. So they're some of the more astute adversaries that I had to deal with. Nonetheless, I came up with a plan. I flipped intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance aircraft, the business model or the doctrine and how we employ them. I flipped it upside down, lowered the altitudes. More or less, it shaped the battle space in a way that was annoying to the adversaries. So we never had to push a red button using kinetics. But it took me about 3 weeks to kind of develop a plan that was outcomes driven. And I would say that was the pivotal moment in my career where I started to embrace the concept of what innovation and the innovation mindset can bring to operations.
And what did those years teach you about leadership, specifically in high stakes, in high ambiguity environments?
Yeah, that's a great question. Leadership's such a foundational part of what all of us do, whether we're tasked to be leaders or not. But nonetheless, my leadership theory really is you have to identify the strengths of the folks around you and then exploit it to the greatest extent possible. And that's a fairly abrasive way of really saying, identify what people are good at, what they enjoy doing, and then maximize that opportunity for them to leverage their own strengths within an organization, within a team, and that'll impact operations in a favorable way. Wouldn't say that's 100% successful all the time, but generally speaking, burnout happens not always because you work long hours, but because you're doing things that don't bring you enjoyment or that you feel good at. So my theory is allow people to do what they naturally do well. Let them tackle it, and I think we'll all benefit from it.
And that's so interesting because I mean, you worked on kind of everything from AI systems with NASA to congested logistics pitches, the Project Mercury, and it's interesting to learn from the breadth of experiences. And across all that, what do you think? What's the most maybe underrated or misunderstood technology that is reshaping the defense area right now?
Sure.
What's your take?
I appreciate that. I wouldn't necessarily use the word underrated, actually. I would use the word misunderstood. I think that, so a lot of the coin words, right? I'm going to say a lot of the things that everybody would already expect me to say, right? So artificial intelligence, edge computing, the space domain as a whole, blockchain can certainly be categorized within that. But also, we're just dipping our toe in the world of quantum computing, right? So that provides an opportunity for some misunderstandings, right? So what I've seen professionally is that in the government, in the Department of Defense, we use a lot of coin words, right? Artificial intelligence and innovation being two of them that are my favorites, right? But as the leaders approach those two topics, they typically extrapolate what they believe it to be rather than having a technical knowledge of how they can employ it. So, one of my initial questions is typically of governmental leaders is, hey, what's the fitness function that you're trying to achieve with this artificial intelligence? Really, what's the purpose statement? And as you try to dial in the understanding of the application of technology, I think that's really the key for senior leaders, rather than trying to educate them on how to develop AI in an engineering type of a way.
What is a fitness function?
A fitness function really is the purpose statement of artificial intelligence, right? So AI as a technology has so many subsets, so many applications. so many sectors that it can be applied to, right, Chris? So as a result, the fitness function is really the purpose statement behind any algorithm that you're developing. So yeah, I think once you define what success is for any program that you're developing, even buying software, correct? So if you buy a suite of programs, you want it to be able to do something. And I don't think that we've taken that same mindset and applied it over to artificial intelligence, in my opinion.
Yeah, the entire discussion around artificial intelligence still feels technology driven, but maybe not purpose or problem driven. Yeah, so it's always, that happens often with technological innovations or technology driven innovations. It's like technology first, but where's the problem? So I don't know, I think I had it a couple of episodes before. We discussed about, the question, so who asked for ChatGPT? It's clearly a technology driven development. And then, of course, the big language models, yes, they have, many purposes for sure. But what exactly is it in a defense context, in a military context, or maybe even a private business context? What's the exact purpose of having it? Better document search? Well, okay, yeah, nice, beautiful. Now you can search and find document much better, but this is worth millions, maybe not. Yeah, just go for a simple indexing solution. Just does the job. Yeah. And you also said, something about cryptos, or more specifically, crypto in being one of the technologies that come out of blockchain. You said crypto could evolve into something like a geopolitical weapon. What's the scenario that you see playing out here?
Well, I think we're seeing some of it, the chess pieces starting to move already. If you look at the change and the shift in global economics and monetary systems, right now the dollar is falling.
Yep.
And while the dollar has some global stability to it, we're seeing emerging currencies such as the BRICS, right? Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa coming together. As a result, there's now competing governmental based, right? Nationalistic based economic measures and applications with money, right? So cryptocurrency offers kind of two opportunities. One is that it allows a global economic system to bypass governments and other systems and other monetary methods, but it can also be weaponized in a number of ways by limiting access to monetary funds. So if you have invested into certain cryptocurrencies and yet a government restricts it to a point where it now locks down access to the funds that you've already invested, that's certainly a problem. Blockchain in and of itself, with distributed ledgers, provides opportunities for nefarious activity, both at the government level and the non-governmental organization level, right? So I'm also worried about not just adversarial countries, but I'm worried about the small groups that are trying to impact societies and monetary systems and, quite frankly, global economies.
I mean, there is two different streams, I think. Yeah, there is one, the more centralized currencies. It could be the new stable coins. Like in the European Union, we have the digital euro, and the initiative around that. We have the same thing, or a similar thing in the US, and probably also in different parts of the world. But then there is also more decentralized. Should we call them currencies, types of money? Not quite sure yet. Yeah, like, of course, for one, which is the Bitcoin, which is clearly leading the pack. But you can literally use any of the other Bitcoins if the network is just big enough to transfer money, or convert money into a cryptocurrency and then convert it back and then distribute it through, I don't know, multiple accounts. And you're not using Swift. You're not using any of these other global payment networks. And of course, then you can pretty easily just go a different way and step aside from any sanctions or whatever other instruments we're currently using in different parts of the world. Yeah.
Yes, you're going exactly down the direction that I'm pushing, Chris. It allows a different set of rules to be applied with how the world is interconnected. Exactly right.
And you've trained so many people. You've trained, of course, some military innovators for sure, but also in the private sector, students. And what is maybe the biggest single myth about innovation that just needs to go away?
Yeah, and I say typically, right? One of my coin phrases is that we use innovation improperly. We use it as though it's a noun, right? When in actuality, it's a verb or an adjective. It's how we do things in innovation. So I think I've actually started walking away from using the word innovation in meetings or with projects, because in actuality, it's just a methodology, a framework by which we do things. You could say the same thing about project management, right? So I think one of the myths is that you have to intentionally apply innovation uh, in a way that is structured so that it ultimately undermines things in meetings. I think overly using the word especially,
Yeah.
will undermine an entire project.
We're probably doing the same thing with the term artificial intelligence. Well, it's a noun, okay, agreed. Yeah. But we're also using it in a more inflationary way. Probably the same thing with cloud. Back in the days, or computer or internet or whatever. So this is it's the big cloudy bubble term that you use to describe something. But you don't get very specific if you say, yeah, let's focus on getting more innovations out. It's like, yeah, sure, okay, cool, but what exactly? What is it? Yeah, I think it's really really interesting if you say, well, it's misused as a noun. It probably should be more of a verb, because what's the outcome of innovation? What's the output
That's
of
right.
innovation? Is it a product? Is it a service? Is it a technology? And what is it? Is it faster, cheaper, better, more expensive? What is it? Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
And then how do we get there? And if you want to label it innovation, that's nice, but it feels in the recent years, if it's just CEOs and high level executives around the world are just throwing the word on the website, the more
That's
often
right.
the better, and then to showcase that they have the better solutions compared to the competition, for example. So
That's right.
is very
That's right.
interesting.
Yes, everybody's doing innovative things.
Sure,
Everybody's got AI, right? And
sure.
if the term is overly used, it then becomes so standardized that it's not
Yeah.
special.
It's not worth it, not
Right.
worth anything anymore. And you've also, you've worked across the US, but also Europe and Africa and probably all around the world. Do you see any pattern, that
Mhm.
innovation culture, okay, let's use the term innovation, but innovation culture varies in those different regions? Like, is it different in the US, in Europe, maybe even in Africa or Asia? Is there any patterns that you could recognize and share from your observation?
Yeah, I think so. The way I view it is different societies, cultures, nations, and regions, they innovate differently. Nobody's right, nobody's wrong. It's just different. It adapts to their geography, to their education system, and quite frankly, towards the strategic objectives of uh, what they're trying to do as either a company, an industry, a sector, or a government, right? So yeah, it's a combination of their culture, how they view the world, and then what their objectives are for doing any initiative. So yeah, I found that it's been enriching to go around the world. I've worked in Japan, and I learned so much from my Japanese counterparts on how they approach problem sets, solutions, and the literal aspect towards operations. That being said, in the Middle East, I
Mhm.
had several interpreters that enriched me on how the Middle Easterners approach situations in life and threats. And it really has broadened my perspectives out quite a bit.
Space,
Hmm.
because I think it's interesting. It's probably one of the bigger avenues that we're seeing in the next decades or so.
Hmm.
And I think what I learned from you is that you're now leading SpaceOps, the SpaceOps strategy for the Michigan National Guard. For anyone who's not, familiar with SpaceOps and also the Michigan National Guard, can you just share? So, what's the Michigan National Guard? What is SpaceOps? What does it have to do with space? Yeah,
Sure.
and what does it mean to bring space to Michigan?
Absolutely. And I'll rewind the tapes a little bit to go into my resume so that you can better understand where all of this fits in. So I was a lieutenant colonel and an officer in the Department of the Air Force. The Department of the Air Force within the Department of Defense represents the U.S. Air Force and the U.S. Space Force. So having done work with MIT, with other research labs, with U.S. Space Force formally and constructed new mission sets, as well as space operations directly. It gave me an education and an experience level that was desirable. Having had returned back from one of my tours in the Pentagon, unfortunately, it was due to medical issues with my wife. She's okay. But that transitioned me back to Michigan, where I started working and integrating with the Michigan National Guard. The National Guard, being the Air and the Army, is a subset of the U.S. Air Force and the U.S. Army. Because it's nationalistic in its focus, in fact, state focused, it has a different mission set. So that being said, as I returned back from the Pentagon, they asked me to start to integrate the space domain into the research and development, the operations, and the exercises within Michigan. The big capstone event every year, in fact, it's in August, is Exercise Northern Strike up in northern Michigan, where we train joint services, Air Force, Army, Navy, Marine Corps, Space Force. But we also train our coalition partners and NATO allies. They come over. And so we have an interconnected exercise. It's multi-domain. And what I mean by that is air, land, sea, cyberspace. What we've been missing is the space domain, that overarching space domain. So I was tasked to come in and develop the space operations strategy to integrate the space domain into national defense, Michigan National Guard, yes, with an output of training our joint and coalition forces in Exercise Northern Strike.
So space and space ops feels, if you're not in the military context, it feels far out. Yeah, probably for many, it feels even, no pun intended, yeah, but it feels more far out than, I don't know, blockchain technology, or I don't know, maybe even crypto, which, many people have had some access to, or some touch points with. But space, well, probably not, because obviously, okay, sure, you're fantasizing about it, you're dreaming about it, you're reading about it, you see what SpaceX is doing with launching the rockets and catching them again. Okay, that's cool, but just a few people have been exposed to space, or will be flying to space in at least the next couple of years. Let's see if this is going to age well or not. But
right.
How do you integrate then space and space ops in existing air, land, and then cybersecurity operations? What's going on there that already now it needs to be integrated in such a strategy?
Yeah, and I would say this applies both to defense activities as well as industry. You really have to approach it from a starting point of strategy. What are you trying to accomplish, right? What is the purpose of either integrating with space, becoming a space company, or using space in a defense application, right? Then you have to define goals that define success, right? So as you have a strategic vision, and we all know that strategies can become a little nebulous, and they're more of an exercise of futility, to say a homework assignment nonetheless, right? Say you've got it done. But if you execute a strategy properly with goals, now you can start to envision how you're going to push the plan, right? And the way I speak to this is with plan of actions and milestones that allow you to get there, with, of course, KPIs, right? Key performance indicators of whether or not you're achieving it. But then you have to collect the data and get the feedback to see if what you're doing actually aligns with a purpose that helps a customer, an end user, a war fighter for defense activities, or provides a greater service to a sector or an industry, right? And then, like anything else, you have to iterate.
So you're integrating it, for example, into something like Exercise Northern Strike. So what does it take to turn a massive multi-force event into a space innovation proving ground, for example? How does it fit together?
Yeah, and it is actually complicated. I've simplified it to the greatest extent possible into two categories. There's using space products and services, and then there's integrating and tasking space, which is completely different. What I mean by that is, right now, by the end of this podcast, I could order space imagery for you. We can do communications, set up the Starlink. You can access space now. But that doesn't mean you have a space company or a space mission. It just means that you're using the services. Quite frankly, we're probably bouncing off satellites, passing the data across an ocean right now, right? So we're using space, but this isn't a space podcast. That being said, if we were to start to use the technology, the payloads, and the services that come with tasking space, now it starts becoming integrated in a way that you can drive what space can provide for products and services. So it's a little nuanced separation of how you're applying it. There's actually a third category that I think is super important and provides the greatest opportunity, and that is support to space. If you have a company or if you're part of a government or an organization, you don't have to launch satellites, right? You don't have to have rockets. You don't have to have the communication system. But think about the medical requirements to have an astronaut go in space. We just had a couple of astronauts come back after a very extended tour. I think it was over a year up in space. And think about the medical requirements that they had coming back to Earth and getting integrated with gravity, the bone density that decreased, the muscles that need to be built back up. That medical service isn't a space mission, but it's a support to space mission. And so I think that's a critical opportunity that virtually most companies can tie into in some way, shape, or form.
What do you see? Will the entire space area, this entire thing, will it become more open over time? Will more and more companies or even maybe public institutions be there, use space products, tasking space, or even, of course, provide support services to space operations? And if so, what's the future that we're headed toward? Because obviously then there is implications on security. How do you communicate to space, in space? I mean, so how do we deal with this in the future if this is going to become more crowded? I'm not talking only about just satellites over there,
right?
But really about everything that's going on up there once it becomes more and more crowded.
Oh, and it's a great question, right? I would say the art of the possible is to be defined. I'll say there's two ways to look at where we're going with space, right? It's with opportunities. Companies will develop as soon as it can be commercialized and monetized, right? So the financial access to participating in space, it's expensive. It's an expensive business to get into. But as we've seen with one of the ideas of SpaceX, which is to make it reusable and thus more economical, we'll see those costs come down. And therefore, we'll see a larger expansion into the space domain. But again, don't forget, a small company can start up and be in support to space, which cuts those costs down a lot. But you look at opportunities, space travel. In fact, we just sent up with Blue Origins our first female crew, right? They were up there for 11 minutes. It was great.
I've seen it, yeah.
But that's going to expand, right? Access to space. Then you start looking at opportunities like mining, so new materials that we can gather out of space. The services from space that integrate our systems here on Earth. So our watches, Amazon Alexa and other smart devices. Soon our homes. I believe access to space will start to integrate how we behave as humans within edge computing devices, but also with each other. We're starting to see that SpaceX, as I believe they're launching a capability where now you can access data from your cell phone using space. So that access is expanding. It's defined as new space, right? But yeah, really the opportunities are endless. I teach at University of Michigan. One of the class I teach is space entrepreneurship. And while it's a cross-functional class, it really explores that art of the possible, right? And where there are monetization opportunities and commercialization that can take place. But you can never forget government organizations that are also trying to petition, whether it's for research and development or whether it's from a threat perspective, right? Weaponization of space, space dominance. And you can see those threats evolve to things like space debris. When we're irresponsible as a government and we start taking out satellites, right? So space debris removal. In fact, I've got a great company here in northern Michigan that's focused exactly on that mission set. But it really dives into another good discussion about ethics of space and international law. But that's a whole nother question.
It certainly is, but it's super interesting because you don't hear too often, about the space domain. And what do you think? Is it going to be rather more open, chaotic, and then it kind of, finds its way? Or do you think that because it's oftentimes also driven by more public organizations or institutions than maybe other sectors like private sectors, is it just going to be a little bit more, I don't know, the race to space, but we're doing this in a very structured and ordered manner? How do you see this unfold in the next, I don't know, decade or two?
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting when we see first world nations that are developed with large economies that are able to invest into space missions and develop it and all the costs associated with it. I think there's going to start to become a global delineation between those nations that have persistent access to space with growing footprints, and then there's nations that can't necessarily participate holistically. So then we're going to start to see alliances to start provide access to space through partnerships and collaboration, right? That could start to create divides amongst which countries are partnering, which countries aren't, what that ends up doing with the economic influences, the space domain control components. And then there will start to become territorial aspects to it. The moon, for instance, right? We're going to start talking about Mars, colonization of space. The U.S. has a joint collaboration with a space station. There's news that China is also putting together a space station. When do those start to compete? And then where do you start delineating things? So again, it becomes an ethical dilemma. Will industry drive and consumerism drive space expansion and growth, or will it be defense activities and control of space, and therefore it's governments? It's going to be complicated. I don't know how that's all going to play out, but
Of course not. But what personal opinion, should this be more a public or a private driven endeavor? I mean, it's not always black or white, but what would be probably the healthier way?
yeah, and the political answer is both, but I think it should be a public option, right? Private ventures into space are going to push the limits.
Yeah, for sure.
They're going to do things that are going to be innovative, as we would describe it, right? But then with public access, similar to air travel, there needs to be a greater societal impact with access to space, the products and the services that come from space, and ultimately how it betters society's cultures and the global economy as a whole.
Okay, I think that's a fair point. And now let's take space. Let's take AI. Yeah, and I don't know. Let's mix it all together. Yeah, so let's create a big cocktail of AI, of technology bullshit buzzwords. Yeah. But there is a certain chance, and I guess a fair chance of technology convergence at some point in time. Maybe not AI in space, but maybe AI and blockchain, or what quantum is going to do to that. So okay, again, I'm throwing in a lot of buzzwords here, but is there any scenario that you see where potential technology convergence really could push space operations, meaning on the opportunity side, but maybe also on the risk side? Is there anything you see on the horizon that, if it comes together, if there is tech convergence, then this is going to unlock the next big thing, and space race going to start big time?
Yeah, I do. I would say one opportunity that kind of sandwiches all the technology, and I hear what you're saying with coin words, but the reality is it's emerging technology.
Sure.
And there's several others that we could name, right? But so here's one, for instance. One of the dilemmas that we have with quantum computing is you need a sterile environment. It needs to be very cold in order to not only assemble, but operate quantum computers. I know a place that's pretty sterile and pretty cold. Space, right? So imagine if space manufacturing took hold of quantum computing and allowed that to be where we operate quantum computers. Certainly, artificial intelligence will be integrated into that, whether it's even systems monitoring or providing products and services to consumers. And what's a great method by which to transmit data and infrastructure? Blockchain. So it could all be sandwiched together. Now there's various other ones, laser communications, we can go on and on and on.
Sure.
But the advantages of using the space domain for similar to AI, right? You have to leverage space for what space is good at. You have to leverage artificial intelligence for what algorithms are good at. And to throw the human component into that, we have to maintain the essence of what humans bring to technology, not just how we use it, but how we're going to integrate with it in a way that controls its future and destiny, right? Quantum computing has the opportunity to really get out of control very quickly, especially once paired with fast-moving artificial intelligence algorithms.
So that means maybe we even need space and space operations at some point to be able to, accelerate technology development. Because quantum is a good example. Maybe there is just a better way of doing it not on Earth, but somewhere else. Yeah, maybe.
Absolutely.
But I don't know. Maybe that's it. Maybe there is a limit to what we're doing on Earth, right? Because of physics, because of whatever. And so the specific physics we have on Earth, obviously, but there's different parameters, obviously, on other planets. So again, this is super far out, but I see where this could go. Yeah, where you can say, okay, well, maybe that technology should be run somewhere else, and maybe not even on planet Earth, because there we have better environment, a more suited environment for that specific combination of technologies, and do it there. And then who's going to be first, and who's going to dominate that technology in that specific area in space? So that's a multidimensional 4D chess problem, that a problem that we haven't probably thought of so far. Yeah.
Well, and back to my earlier point, that's where the discussion can easily slip right back into ethics and international law. So, who owns a certain domain? Who controls it? Or what if somebody creates a threat within their satellite detonation? Nefarious activity with parasitically flying next to another satellite. That's just an example that's very easy and visual to put into place. But yeah, you're absolutely right. The opportunities that are presented with space create new dilemmas, but the opportunities think about space mining for a minute. There are new elements and new materials that aren't indigenous to Earth that are going to create unbelievable opportunities and potential threats, right? Because next thing you know, we find out that, it's radioactive or whatever the equivalency of something that we may not even know what the threat is at this point, right? That could be the very demise of the human race, to take it dramatically, right? But space manufacturing is a really neat opportunity for us to expand technology and make it accessible to everybody. Yeah, absolutely.
And on a more personal level, when you live in a world of classified data, defense, space, how do you switch off, or do you ever?
No, you really don't. And so I have just retired from the Air Force after, again, about 29 years, just 2 months ago. And no, it becomes kind of who you are. And I would even define it as it's the characteristic that embodies professionalism, right? And any industry has this. I don't know that a doctor who's good at their trade ever really shuts it off, right? They take a step away from it, maybe on a vacation, but even then, they're still reading medical journals. I love a case study is Tom Brady, right? A football quarterback that just recently retired. He measured every calorie, every nutrient that went into his body. Did he ever shut it off? Absolutely not. And football wasn't even year round. So I would like to think that I was professional enough that no, I didn't shut it off, because global security, national defense, and the societies that we're serving, it's important enough that I need to stay on, monitoring the news, right? Reading things, certainly researching. And then what I discovered in the last 6 years of my career was being able to integrate with industry partners and academia really opened up the new possibilities for requirements that are needed for operations in the Department of Defense, but also that dual use technology that also supports and enables societies, cultures, and economies that isn't defense related.
It really does, for sure. And if you could go back and give your younger self some advice, let's say on day one of your military career, which certainly was a pivotal moment,
Sure.
what would you say now to your younger self back then?
That's a good question, Chris. If I could go back, so I joined the Air Force when I was 18 years old, back in 1996. And if I could sit down with myself for 15 minutes, I would challenge young me to fearlessly say yes. I think that sometimes it's better to be lucky than good. And so I've had a number of opportunities that happened to drop into my lap. One, for instance, was I was the Department of Defense representative to NATO for artificial intelligence to help with the NATO AI strategy. That didn't come about because I pursued anything. It really was a tasker request that came out through the Pentagon, and I just happened to raise my hand first and said yes. I would say that is probably the one ingredient that's offered me success within my career. To go back to my young 18-year-old self, say do it fearlessly. It will take you places that are non-linear in your career, and that's where it gets really exciting. And then if I could only add on to that with add in diverse perspectives. We all come from a certain culture, and a lot of times it's homogenous within, whether it's a socioeconomic scale, your education system, but seek out different perspectives, and it's really going to help shape you and take the bias out of a lot of the approaches that you have to your career, to leadership, to technology inclusion, to operations, and how you integrate with society as a whole, who you're serving, right? Yeah. And then the biggest takeaway I would say would be to meet people and organizations with where they're at. Don't try to boil the ocean is one fun way that we say in the innovation community, right? But don't try to change the culture. You can certainly impact and influence culture just by your skills and abilities that you bring to an organization or to a team. But trying to change everything, it's just futile, right? The world viewpoint for most whether it's a company or whether it's a small team, that's hard to change. So go in there, try to make positive impacts, but meet people where they are.
So, Brew, let's take a breath and let's make a full stop here and let all that sink in to the listeners, because I think we've taken them far out into space, back to defense and all that stuff. But the way you explain it, specifically how specific technologies can come together and actually create, maybe even much more opportunity than we have on Earth right now. Who knows? But also the risks associated with it in terms of cybersecurity, but also weaponizing space is
Absolutely
probably something we all need to think about. It's very inspirational to hear, firsthand from you. But before this conversation ends, we do have a tradition on this podcast where my previous guest leaves a question for my next guest without knowing who my next guest is, and also not knowing what we are going to talk about. So there is a question for you. And the question that has been left for you is, if you could go back in time with the information and knowledge you have today, what is one thing you would have done differently?
Well, I probably would have invested in Bitcoin way early on. That would have been a lot of fun, right? But no, in all seriousness, I probably worked too many hours, and that came at a personal sacrifice, right? Been married for 25 years, and I'm lucky she stuck by me. But through a lot of long nights and working through weekends. So if I could go back and change one thing, I would still challenge myself to work hard, but change the amount of time that I'm working on it. Actually try to decouple from the tasks and understand that not everything is a critical task that needs to be accomplished. So yeah, I would say the personal growth is I became a workaholic in my adult years, and that came at some sacrifice.
But was it worth it?
No, it wasn't, Chris. And here's why I say that. I retired 2 months ago from the Air Force. I'll challenge you by the end of 2025 to find a document that has my name on it. Now, I've impacted people and programs and projects along the way, and they were meaningful. But I have 3 daughters, got a wonderful wife, and ultimately, that's the legacy that I leave behind. I think I can create an even greater impact by investing in my 3 daughters and having them go do great things in the world. Now my experience and what I educate them on can be multiplied. And while I think I do that to some extent, I spent a lot of years away from them. Was it worth it? No, I had a great time. I had great impacts. But ultimately, as I reflect back on a long 30-year career, I could have done better on the home front.
So of course, I don't have any insight in, what you exactly did in your nearly 3 decades long career in the industry, in the military. But maybe you're underestimating the impact you had just by a tiny bit. I'm not quite sure, but I fully agree. The impact you have on the people around you, the family, is probably the most rewarding thing at the end of the day you can have. So that's a great answer. Thanks for sharing that.
Thanks. Yeah, just trying to be a little transparent, right?
And with that, Brew, that's it for this episode. Thank you so much, really, again, for being my guest on this episode. It is rare to get, those kind of insights from someone like you, who has such a broad experience and a deep experience at the same time into, areas some of us will probably never even look into in the next couple of years. So really, thank you for sharing this. I appreciate the time.
Thank you, Chris. And I want to thank you and Itonics. It's a tremendous company. I look forward to collaborating with you guys further. Thank you for this opportunity. The audience that you have is meaningful and impactful. I hope I was able to provide something thought-provoking. But yes, the world is certainly a smaller place than it was 50 to 100 years ago. Thank you for the opportunity for me to speak to your audience.
Wait until we expand into space. And to our listeners, if you haven't subscribed to this podcast yet, please go ahead and do so. Yeah, it's a small thing, but it makes sure that we can, invite such high-profile guests like Brew this time. So if you did not subscribe yet, please go ahead and do so. It doesn't cost anything. And thanks for listening. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.